Welcome back. You're watching NewsX. Let's talk about a subject that has touched many nerves in the recent past. We've heard about sexual harassment of women at the workplace, but how about sexual harassment of men? A group of NGOs working for men's rights are now demanding protection for men on this account. Here's a report.
The wheel has turned full circle. In 1997, a landmark bill was passed to protect women from sexual harassment at work. 13 years later, NGOs are asking for the bill to be made gender neutral and protect the men as well. The trigger is a draft bill that the Women and Child Development Ministry wants to introduce in Parliament this session. It protects a large part of the workforce from harassment at work, even covering unorganized sectors, but doesn't make any mention of the men.
You see, sexual harassment is not a story which starts from women. You know, sexual harassment is a story which starts from somehow or the other, very unfortunately from not all men, but really handful of men who really spoil the whole social fabric by doing it. So they cannot complain.
Women's rights activists counter that most of the victims are actually women. The government says that the private sector has been lax in keeping the problem under check.
The bill has ignored that men cannot be sexually harassed. See, this sexual harassment is nothing related to the gender. It is basically the abuse of the power. In my organization, there are various female bosses. So they are at the powerful position. So anybody, whether male or female, can abuse that power. So it's nothing related to gender that only women can be harassed.
The ministry is also proposing that every firm should have a woman heading a committee to look into these cases of sexual harassment at work. Male rights activists assert that the proposed bill gives unnecessary legal power to women and that it's unacceptable in a sane and just society. With more and more men filing complaints of sexual harassment at work, it would be interesting to note if the grouse of male rights activists would be taken on board during the parliament. With video journalist Sharif Dharma, Afreen Alam, NewsX, New Delhi.
And to discuss these issues, joining us today in the studio is Mr. Wasif Ali, who is a member of the Save the Indian Family Foundation. Thank you, Mr. Ali, for joining us. Also joining us, Madhu Kishwar, who is the editor of Manushi. She joins us live from Delhi. Madhu Kishwar, thank you very much for coming. And also with us live from our newsroom is our correspondent Mohit Lalwani, my colleague, who's been tracking this issue very closely. Thank you very much for joining us indeed. Let me come to you first, Mr. Ali. Yeah. Your organization is one of the organizations that has raised strong objections to this bill, saying that it is completely woman-centric. What really are you opposed to on this?
See, what our view is that this sexual harassment bill, it needs a total overhaul. It has got various loopholes that can be actually misused. It is actually designed not to give justice to the women who are actually victims of sexual harassment. Point number one, you will see, there is a committee that is to be formed. That committee, they have given a guideline that it has to be headed by a woman. 50% has to be women, committed to the cause of women. Now you're forming a committee that will go into inquiry of the proposed allegation of sexual harassment that is committed to the cause of women. That means you have decided that the man who is accused is not supposed to get justice.
Right.
And point number two, they have given the consideration of money into this. That any woman who comes there, first there will be reconciliation, talks of reconciliation. If they come to any agreement, then no inquiry will take place. And if the allegation is proved, I don't know how it will be proved, there's no inquiry process in place, then they put the compensation as a penalty. Right. But this doesn't happen in any criminal justice system. We want all women to get justice who are actually victims of sexual harassment. But the guilty should be punished, should be put behind bars. There should be no temptation of money into this. Once there is a temptation of money, there will be huge misuse of this law.
Right, that's a fair point. Let me go across to Madhu Kishwar, who's also with us. Madhu Kishwar, you just heard what Mr. Ali had to say. He raised a couple of concerns. The fact that the person who will be heading this committee will be a woman committed to the cause of women, and that perhaps would tilt this in the advantage of the woman, regardless of the merit of this particular complaint. At a time when world over we are hearing of cases where men are also victims of sexual harassment, in your view, is there any merit in making this bill gender neutral?
See, by the logic that Mr. Ali is using, women should then refuse to go to courts where there are male judges. To mistrust the presence of women is to do great injustice, just as to assume that simply because women are heading a committee, they are going to be pro-women. Doesn't work that way. We know there are many women who are woman-hating, who will be particularly harsh on other women. So this is, I think, totally unfounded. However, I do think that in our country we have a very sad and tragic track record of most laws being easy to abuse and misuse. The Save Family Foundation is a product of a whole track record of our judicial system, the police system, of putting the domestic violence and anti-dowry laws to great abuse, allowing false complaints while not giving real redress to genuine victims. Our judicial and police system are incapable, by and large, with stray exceptions, of delivering justice, so that everybody feels wronged. Ask women if they get justice, they will be equally disappointed. They will express similar sentiments of disappointment at the way courts function, at the way the police functions. So laws are easily abused in India because our systems are very, very dysfunctional. However, I agree with Mr. Ali that adding monetary compensation is a tricky matter. I don't think I want to have a price tag on my izzat.
Right.
And we know, for example, in all these recent cases of sexual harassment that have hit the headlines in America and in other countries in the West, how settlements are made, and it almost becomes like extortion exercise.
Right.
In cases where the harm done is of a very, very deep kind, you've destroyed somebody's career, for example, then to recompense is one thing. But to say there should be financial recompense as by way of punishment, I think is a very ugly idea.
Right. Let me also go across to Mohit Lalwani, my colleague who joins us from the newsroom. Mohit, you just heard the concerns there. While on one hand, there is hope that a bill like this will actually make women come forward and talk about the kind of harassment which takes place in some workplaces and actually encourage them to come forth with their complaints. On the other hand, there is also concern that the law might be misused for cases like extortion. What really is the international experience as far as defining these kind of laws are concerned?
Well, the first thing, Rukmini, is I think we need to understand the scope of this entire proposed bill. You know, does it fall under the civil code? Does it fall under the penal code? Who eventually becomes liable if there are any fiduciary penalties? Is it the employer? Is it the government? You know, these are various questions that need to be answered as well. Now, internationally, and this is extremely important to understand, that internationally, while even in the US, which obviously is the most advanced when it comes to sexual harassment cases, they generally restrict it to situations within the workplace. There's no gender bias. Initially, of course, it was. You know, it was in 1991. The first draft was specifically for women. Today, of course, it's for the same gender as well. So in that sense, I think it's important for us to understand the scope of how this all fits. And I think it's a very valid point that the police and the judiciary may add to corruption in what could be which could be a proposal to actually give teeth to sexual harassment in the workplace.
Right, let me come back to Mr. Ali. Mr. Ali, it's true that under Article 15 of the Constitution, it prohibits discrimination again under the grounds of religion or sex. But there is a social reality in India. Women are really oppressed even today. But if women can get reservations in Panchayat and in Parliament on the basis of gender, which is a positive discrimination, why can't there be a law in their favor?
See, first of all, I want to correct Mr. Madhu Kishwar on my part that it's not about that women heading the committees and real issue with us. It's the word committed to the cause and issue for us. Now, see, if you look at the track record of India, whenever we have made a law which is women-centric, which has got a lot of tooth and nail into it, it has been abused. 498A is the prime example for it. We got formed because of that 498A law. Next came DV Act. It is also again being misused. There is consideration of money into it. It is being used for the extortion of money. Okay. So now when you are making a law which is actually a special provision for women, and providing a system around it that gives a bias status to a woman when you're filing the case, you're leading to the misuse and abuse of power, and other half of the gender, that is the men, you are actually harassing them, the innocent men. So what you are saying is that I'm okay with giving power to women even if innocent men are getting suffered. So this is not the principle behind the criminal justice system. You don't design anything like this.
Right, let me go across to Madhukeshwar again. Now, Madhu, you just heard what Mr. Ali had to say. What is the reason behind the decision of having a woman committed to the cause of women heading this committee? Do we not trust a man to do a justifiable job in this case?
I think the presence of women often helps women narrate very difficult personal experiences, because sexual harassment can be very traumatic, especially if it is not confined to light-hearted flirtation. It's very often very embarrassing for women to explain and to describe what happens. We know, for example, how brutalized rape victims feel with judges and male lawyers who make them feel further humiliated, add insult to injury. So the presence of women is important, but that is not to say that any woman and every woman, any sari wearing creature is necessarily sensitive to other women. You have any number of cases of men who are extremely sensitive to women and women who are not, and vice versa. So, but the presence of women, I think, is extremely important. But the other thing I want to say is,
committed to the cause of women. See,
if it is made gender neutral, then it's okay. Now, the point that I want to emphasize is, if the laws are prone to misuse in the because of the crude manner in which they are drafted and because of a very corrupt and inefficient implementation machinery, how will this law not be misused in the hands of men? So just to say giving recourse to men will as though equalize the situation.
Absolutely.
There are any number of men who also misuse laws.
That's an absolutely fair point.
The problem is far more serious.
That is a fair point, and I will let Mr. Ali respond to that, but it's time for us to take a very short commercial break. Back with more on this developing story on the flip side. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching NewsX, and we are talking about the proposed bill on sexual harassment. This is a bill said to be in favor of women, and there is also a debate about whether this bill should be made gender neutral. Wasif Ali, who is a member of the Save the Indian Family Foundation, is still with us. Mr. Ali, before we went into a break, you were making a point that you had a particular issue about the person who heads the committee being a woman who's committed to the cause of women.
See, my specific issue is with that phrase, committed to the cause of women. See, this sexual harassment bill has been made based on some Vishakha guideline that judgment came out in 1997. Now, in that Vishakha guideline, this committed to the cause of women word is not there. They've inserted it on themselves. So you have got an inquiry panel which you are saying will be committed to the cause of women. This is not a neutral panel now. This panel becomes biased. Now, any person who goes there, he is intimidated now. That he knows that the inquiry that is being held may not be in his favor. May hold him guilty without giving him an opportunity to prove his innocence.
Right, Madhu, Mr. Ali is voicing a concern that a lot of men have actually raised. Now, if you take the international example, most Western countries, including the US, Australia, and several other Western countries have made these laws gender neutral. In fact, the US experience has been that sexual harassment claims filed by men have actually doubled between 1990 and 2009. So why not keep this aspect in mind while making this bill?
See, again, I don't have any problem in it becoming gender neutral. But the problem of implementation and a dysfunction